Hello all, today we're going to be talking about the Aztecs. To go ahead and begin, we need to talk about the origins. So if we look at that top right hand corner there, it should be somewhat familiar to some of you. In Aztec lore, they were to settle in a spot where they found this symbol of a cactus with a eagle eating a snake. And that's where they decided to settle, according to, of course, their tradition. However, if we do look at some of the histories that we see a discrepancy there. So we do the origins of where they actually came from is an area known as Aztlan. A lot of people think this is the whole southwest area. So somewhat nomadic tribe, cruising around. Finally, they're going to settle in the Valley of Mexico right around the 13th century. We're not entirely sure, but like I said, according to their lore, that's what it states. Now, according to a lot of people around this time, the Aztec themselves were considered vulgar. And what I mean by vulgar, the religion they practice, how they treated other people who weren't Aztec. A lot of surrounding tribes or civilizations really didn't appreciate the Aztec. So as they're roaming around, typically the Aztecs served as mercenaries. Mercenaries, that's the problem with mercenaries. They go to whoever the highest bidder is. So it's a group of people that you really can't trust if you can just simply pay them off. And that's one of the reasons also why the surrounding tribes really didn't get along with the Aztec initially. Eventually they fled into the marshes of Lake Texcoco. So if you've ever been in a marsh, you have rotting, decaying plant matter. It doesn't smell too good. You step down into the muck and mud. You pull your sandal out and it stays in the muck and mud. So not really a good place to live. Plus, you have a lot of mosquitoes, a lot of insects. It's not one of the best places to set up a civilization. But at that point, supposedly that's where they saw this eagle. At the same time, though, that was the only land that nobody wanted to live at. So they're kind of pushed into these marshes of Lake Texcoco. Nobody would want to go after them into the marshes. Now, one of the reasons why they fled into this march is because Coxcox declared war on them for sacrificing his daughter. What was supposed to happen? This was supposed to be a marriage between this ruler's daughter and an Aztec. And what ended up happening is the Aztec actually flayed her, skinned her alive. One of their priests was wearing her skin. And of course, if a ruler sees his daughter, skin like that, and someone wearing it, pretty grotesque, pretty vulgar. So they fled to those marshes. Oops. Okay, so Aztec origins, symbols of divine prophecy. That's what we just talked about as far as the eagle is concerned. After building Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs destroyed all records of their past. So we don't have a written record of their actual past, and they created a more favorable history. However, some of the surrounding tribes, we did get some information from them from early Catholic priests. Completely alien in historical records. A lot of times a civilization will destroy their past history in order for them to look more favorable. We see this in the Aztec. We see this way later on in the Soviet Union, where a government will destroy their previous history and create a more favorable one. So according to the Aztecs, this goes back to their lore, their divine prophecy of why they ended up where they were. But think about it. Think about it logically. Why would somebody purposefully put themselves in an environment that is difficult to build? A marsh? That's a little difficult. Now, one of the advantages of being in a marsh, however, is your access to water. If you're going to have an agrarian or a society that is based upon agriculture, you need access to water. A marsh, of course, is going to be lots of access to water. The marsh itself, great for agriculture. That decomposing plant matter, very good to grow your crops. Now, this term here, it says chinampas. It says floating gardens, but you have to remember, they're not actually floating here. They're just building layer upon layer upon layer. Making canals in between them makes transporting goods really, really easy because you're just floating things along. You can carry a lot more weight in a boat than on your back, so a lot more efficient. Other things that they were utilizing to survive were things like algae, ducks, anything and everything that was edible. Early civilizations, well, they're going to eat it. Now, when we look at Aztec religion, they looked at life as life. You're at the mercy of nature. You're not really able to control your environment all that much, but still, they were to an extent. They would attempt to placate the gods through ritual sacrifice. In some cases, this was a daily occurrence, depending on what was going on. If droughts were happening, if flooding was happening, of course, this would happen more and more and more. They were waiting for the return of their god, Quetzalcoatlat, in the year 1519. This so happens when roughly Cortez shows up. So it kind of lined up. They thought he was a god. Initially, not everybody, Montezuma himself, being that he's a priest, ruler, king, if you will, he saw this as a sign that something was going to change, and it definitely did. So if we look at the hierarchy of Aztec society, of course, you have at the very top, you have the royal family. So this would be with Montezuma and his family, his royal wives. Women were highly respected, particularly in the royal family. All members were, the expectation anyways, would be that they're dignified, brave. They do not run away from battle. If you did, you would probably be sacrificed. The nobility, these included priests, military officers, government leaders. Kind of interesting the way they set this up. It was by merit only. So this was not a birthright that you were a priest, military officer, or government leader. You had to show that you had the ability to do this. So if you were as far down as a serf or a commoner or a merchant, you had the ability to move up to nobility if you had the right character, if you had the right ability in battle. Next, we've got merchants. Just like what merchants do, they sell stuff. They also traded pretty far away. One of the things that Aztec are known for are their obsidian blades, which are nowhere near the Valley of Mexico. So they had to go somewhere else in order to get that obsidian to create their knives and war clubs, etc. Commoners, next on our hierarchy here, consisted of farmers, laborers, craftspeople, servants, vendors. They lived in capulos, or also known as barrios. So people were in these separate little areas within Tenochtitlan itself. You didn't have a huge mixing. Typically, the nobles were closer to the center, along with the royal family, and then you go out from there. Finally, we have the serfs, just like serfs in Europe. These are people who are working the estates of the more wealthy individuals. Were considered inferior to commoners. Now, if we look at slavery, kind of interesting the way they set up slavery in Aztec society, because you were able to sell yourself into slavery in order to get out of debt, for example. Not too much stigma was attached to slavery. You could go all the way from a noble to a slave simply by selling yourself to slavery. And then also parents in some cases would sell their children into slavery, which, not a bad idea. No, just kidding. That'd be bad. All right, moving along. Oh, one thing I did want to put up here. Where's that? Oh. All right, so that didn't work. It did not save. I want to show you some pictures of Quetzal birds. If you get a chance, Google it. Very highly valued, just like cacao beans. So we know that they did go relatively far away from Tenochtitlan for trading purposes, and we see that, like I said previously, through obsidian blades, but also Quetzal feathers as well, because we see that more in the tropical rainforest around the Yucatan. Now, Tenochtitlan, also known as the floating city, kind of like Venice, where you have different canals going through it. Like I said, a lot easier to move things around. If you put on a boat, you can put some pretty heavy stuff on a boat and float it around. There are three main causeways. So if we look at this map right here, that would be the causeways right there. Those are, or in other words, bridges to Tenochtitlan itself in order to get there. So pretty easy to defend it if you cut off those causeways. So if you have Europeans, for example, coming in to try to conquer your city, you can, bring the bridge up, like a drawbridge, if you will, or completely just destroy it. That way it makes it more difficult for them to come into your city. If you notice, it said the city contained anywhere from 80,000 people to 250,000 people. Now, that was dependent on the time of the year and what was going on, festivals, etc. So the city would get larger during holidays, for example. Then people would spread out at other times. If they're going to battle, of course, you're going to have a lot less people in the city. All right, so the marketplace itself, anywhere from 60,000 people a day would go visit the market. Why does it keep doing that? There we go. So let's fix that. And this is like your grocery store. So this is also where people would communicate and do normal things that you do in a market, a mall, for example. Check things out. They would barter for food, corn, eat armadillos, things like that. I wouldn't suggest that. Armadillos are known for having some nasty diseases. Straw mats, I want to bring that to your attention because that's kind of what Tenochtitlan was for the most part built on, were these straw mats layered and layered and layered and layered, and after decades it would build up. So a lot of it, where they would walk anyways, were these straw mats. The buildings, something else. You guys are going to watch a video to see how those were built, the foundations anyways, to make sure those stone buildings didn't sink into the muck. Luxury items like those Quetzal feathers that I mentioned earlier could be found within the market. Architecture, I'm not going to go in depth because we are going to be watching a video on architecture, so stay tuned for that. If you look here, the double pyramid for two different gods, important to know that. That's the only case where we see a double pyramid in this area of the world. Typically it's just one. We see these skull racks. That's also going to be explained a little bit in starters, and then also the video we will end up watching. All right, for now, that is it. You will have an assignment in your notebook that's going to go on page 49, along with these notes that will go on page 50. It deals with this, the hierarchy. So I do want an image, a visual representation of each of these. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 visual representations of this. So if it's a royal family, make them look royal, have some Quetzal feathers. Nobility, same thing. Merchants, what are they selling? What goods? Commoners, what are they making? Serfs, toiling away in the fields, and of course slaves. And that is our notes. Bye-bye.